Breaking news from England. Exclusive sources within the British royal family have confirmed that King Charles I is currently in the final stages of metastatic cancer, putting the entire power structure of the monarchy on red alert. But the crisis goes beyond the king's health. Princess Anne has just destroyed the royal conspiracy, and the main target is none other than Prince William. According to investigative sources, Queen Camilla is accused of secretly directing a secret campaign to damage the honor and reputation of the heir to the throne. The accusation was surgical, timed precisely as King Charles prepared the documents, formalizing his abdication. While aides were drafting the statement that would confirm Prince William as regent-in-waiting, Camilla moved first, claiming she possessed proof that the heir to the throne had rekindled a romance with Rose Farquhar, his university sweetheart. Her claim was not casual gossip. In private briefings to sympathetic journalists, Camilla insinuated that Catherine, Princess of Wales, had never been William's first choice, just as Diana had never been Charles's. "History repeats itself," she said with a tragic sigh that masked calculation. "Every man of the crown has his Camilla, the woman he cannot forget." The words struck like a dagger. At the very moment the nation was ready to embrace William and Catherine as the steady future of the monarchy, the queen consort had drawn a direct parallel between herself and the other woman narrative that once destroyed Diana. By morning, tabloids across London screamed in crimson fonts, "A new Camilla in the palace?" Behind the palace gates, chaos simmered. Courtiers loyal to Charles scrambled to contain the damage, while aides close to William insisted the rumor was a calculated strike, a desperate move by a fading consort whose influence was slipping through her fingers. The king, weakened by illness yet lucid, summoned both sides. His directive was simple: end this war before it kills the crown. But the war was already alive. In the shadows stood Andrew Parker Bowles, Camilla's former husband. Publicly retired, privately restless, he saw in this scandal an opportunity not only to vindicate old wounds, but to reinsert his family bloodline into royal proximity. If Camilla fell, he would fall with her. If she triumphed, his children Laura and Tom might one day stand within the royal circle itself. Together, they plotted a narrative that William, though publicly flawless, secretly longed for the simplicity of his youth, that his old flame Rose Farquhar had remained emotionally close, that Catherine, the commoner who captured a prince, had played the same role Diana once had, the intruder in another woman's love story. It was venom wrapped in nostalgia, weaponized with precision, and it struck at the very foundation of the public's devotion to Catherine. For months, Britain had rallied around the couple. Polls showed record trust in William's leadership. His calm presence during Charles's treatment had earned admiration even among critics of the monarchy. Yet Camilla's insinuations tapped into something darker, the national memory of betrayal, of televised tears, and broken fairy tales. Once again, the ghosts of the 1,980 seconds seemed to rise over Buckingham's gilded roof. Inside the palace, Princess Anne watched in silence. She had seen every scandal, every collapse of royal decorum, and she recognized the smell of orchestration. "Camilla is cornered," she told a senior aide, "and a cornered creature bites." Anne's loyalty lay not with sentiment, but with survival of the crown, not of individuals. What she uncovered next would change the course of the transition forever. As the abdication documents reached their final draft, the palace press office prepared to announce a new era of stability. But beneath the marble floors, the old power lines crackled. Jealousy, legacy, blood. Camilla's tears in public masked her maneuvers in private. Andrew's quiet charm hid an agenda centuries old to merge his lineage with the throne itself. And while William continued his duties, shaking hands and opening hospitals, the machinery of sabotage whirred behind him. A single headline could undo decades of respect. A single photograph, real or staged, could fracture the monarchy's fragile rebirth. By week's end, Buckingham Palace was split in two. Those who believed in the new reign of William and Catherine, and those who whispered that the crown had already been tainted by another Camilla story. The transition had begun, but instead of unity, the first tremor of betrayal had already shaken the kingdom. The morning after Camilla's whisper turned into a tabloid headline, the palace woke to a storm that no royal advisor could contain. Newspapers lined the streets with bold, suggestive titles: "The Heir's Secret Heart," "Rose Farquhar," and "The Prince's Return to the Past." In just 24 hours, a single insinuation had evolved into a full-blown media narrative. Anonymous friends of the Queen Consort fed reporters new fragments, a shared glance at a charity event, a private correspondence, misinterpreted, a rumor of late-night calls. None of it was verifiable. All of it was compelling. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, orchestrated with surgical precision by two minds: Camilla and her ex-husband, Andrew Parker Bowles. Once united by marriage, now bound by ambition, they understood the architecture of scandal. Andrew moved quietly through London's media circuit, visiting old contacts from his military and social days, seeding the idea that, where there's smoke, there's fire. Camilla, meanwhile, played the part of the sorrowful queen, offering veiled sympathy. "Catherine must be exhausted," she told a journalist at a charity function. "Balancing motherhood and royal duty is never easy, especially when the heart is tested." Her tone was soft, her smile tragic, but the implication was lethal. For decades, the British public had been conditioned to see royal infidelity as destiny, not exception. And Camilla exploited that reflex. The shadow of Diana's heartbreak still lingered over the kingdom. The more she invoked it, the more her narrative gained traction. She knew the country didn't need proof, it needed a story that felt true. Inside Buckingham Palace, the crisis team gathered in a tense, windowless room. Phones rang non-stop, statements were drafted, then torn apart. No one dared confront Camilla directly. Her title still commanded deference, even as her words undermined the very institution she served. But Princess Anne was not one for deference. She had spent a lifetime cutting through pretense, and to her, the pattern was unmistakable. "This is coordinated," she told a senior aide from the royal press office. "It's not gossip, it's a campaign." Anne began quietly tracing the leak. Within days, she discovered what few dared suspect. The rumor's roots extended beyond idle talk. Andrew Parker Bowles had been seen in discreet meetings with two journalists known for selling exclusive royal content. One of them had previously been blacklisted for publishing forged photographs during Meghan's media wars. When Anne confronted the palace's communications director, he hesitated, then admitted there was chatter recordings, even of Andrew hinting at a future where the crown opens its doors to new blood. The phrase chilled her. New blood. It wasn't just about headlines. It was about lineage. Camilla and Andrew's plan, Anne realized, was deeper than character assassination. If they could erode William's reputation, question his fidelity, and paint his marriage as unstable, the succession could be delayed or restructured. And in that vacuum, Camilla's children, Laura and Tom Parker Bowles, might find a path into royal legitimacy. Anne had seen manipulation before, but never at this scale. It was no longer about jealousy or insecurity. It was a bid to rewrite the bloodline. While she prepared her report for King Charles, the Queen Consort's campaign gathered dangerous momentum. Influencers dissected Catherine's body language. Podcasts speculated on unseen tension between the royal couple. Even foreign outlets picked up the story. A French newspaper ran the headline, "Le Prince et la Fille du Passé," the prince and the girl from the past. Behind closed doors, Catherine maintained her composure, appearing serene in public, but silent in private. William, however, was furious. He recognized the fingerprints of manipulation, the same tactics that once destroyed his mother. "They're using the same playbook," he told a close friend. "Only the names have changed." Camilla's allies fed the press with phrases designed to echo through social media. History repeats. Every king has a secret. Even golden couples have cracks. And slowly, the public's confidence began to waver. Then came the photograph, a blurry image from a charity event showing William leaning toward a woman with auburn hair, laughing. The caption read simply, "Rose returns?" It was enough. The story exploded anew, climbing to the top of every newsfeed, dissected by talk shows and analysts alike. The palace's silence only deepened the mystery. But within the walls of Buckingham, Princess Anne had already begun her counterstrike. She had gathered evidence, financial traces, phone logs, security reports, linking Andrew to media payouts and unverified sources. And now, she intended to bring it directly to Charles before the scandal consumed his son. The monarchy's transfer of power was meant to symbolize continuity and unity. Instead, it was unraveling into a psychological chess game, where every move was broadcast to millions. As dusk fell over London, the lamps outside Buckingham flickered against the drizzle. Behind those walls, Anne's footsteps echoed down the marble corridor toward her brother's study. In her hand, a sealed envelope. Inside, proof that the greatest threat to the future of the crown wasn't illness, politics, or the press. It was family. When Princess Anne entered the king's private study that night, the rain was hammering the palace windows, as if echoing the storm inside. Charles sat beneath the dim light of his desk lamp, his hands trembling as he held the papers Anne had placed before him, transcripts, financial ledgers, and photographs. Each page was a fragment of truth. Each fragment led back to one woman, Camilla. Anne spoke quietly, her voice low and controlled. "Brother, what's unfolding is no mere rumor. It's an operation, a coordinated attempt to destroy William's standing before you step down." Charles's face hardened. For weeks he had dismissed whispers of intrigue as gossip from bored courtiers. But this was different. There were receipts, transfers, and coded messages linking Andrew Parker Bowles to media contacts and private investigators. The web was undeniable. Anne's tone sharpened. She's using your illness as cover. And Andrew, he's not doing this out of loyalty to her. He's doing it for their children, for Tom and Laura. If William falls, the public's trust collapses. Then comes a restructuring, and suddenly their branch of the family becomes indispensable. It's not scandal, it's succession. Charles leaned back, pale and shaken. My God, replacing blood with convenience. The king's voice faltered. The thought of betrayal from the woman he had once fought so hard to legitimize struck like a physical blow. He looked to his sister, the one person who had never sought favor or flattery. How far is it gone? Anne didn't blink. Far enough to wound Catherine. The rumor about Rose Farquhar wasn't an accident. It's a calculated echo of what they once said about Mother and you. Camilla's trying to turn Catherine into Diana and William into you. Charles buried his face in his hands. The pattern was cruelly familiar. A queen consort manipulating public sympathy, while a young princess shouldered humiliation. The cycle he had spent a lifetime regretting was being reborn within his own family. Meanwhile, outside the royal circle, the press frenzy was reaching its peak. Rose Farquhar's name was everywhere. Reporters camped outside her family estate in Gloucestershire. Cameras flashed as she left for work, her face pale with confusion. It's absurd, she told one journalist. I've known William since we were kids. He's a dear friend, nothing more. But her denial barely registered. The narrative had momentum, and the truth was no longer newsworthy. Catherine, ever the embodiment of restraint, carried on with her duties. She smiled for cameras, shook hands with schoolchildren, and ignored the tabloid questions shouted from behind metal barricades. Yet those close to her noticed the fatigue behind her eyes. She had lived through storms before, but this one was personal, cruel, and calculated to reopen every old wound Diana once bore. Behind the scenes, Andrew Parker Bowles was restless. He had underestimated Anne's resolve. Every time he moved a piece, she was already 2 steps ahead. Her network of discreet allies, seasoned courtiers, archivists, even retired security officers were feeding her information. One evening, an envelope arrived at her office marked simply, "From the Archives." Inside were letters Camilla's own correspondence from years earlier, hinting at her long-standing resentment toward Diana, and veiled references to restoring balance to the family tree. Anne brought those letters to Charles. His reaction was immediate and devastating. She never stopped fighting ghosts, he whispered, staring at the inked pages that smelled faintly of old perfume. Even after I made her queen, she still needed to win against a woman long gone. For Charles, the realization was shattering. Camilla's war was not against William or Catherine. It was against the memory of Diana, an endless, invisible opponent, whose shadow still dictated the crown's emotional gravity. Anne's next move was bold. She summoned Catherine for a private walk through the palace gardens at dawn. The two women, often contrasted in temperament, one stoic, one graceful, found common ground in quiet understanding. They'll try to make you doubt yourself, Anne warned. Don't. You're not here because you married a prince. You're here because you've become what the crown needs to survive. Catherine listened in silence, then said softly, if Camilla wants to win through chaos, we'll win through calm. Oh. That morning, Catherine appeared in public, wearing a thistle brooch, once owned by Queen Elizabeth II, the same one Anne had given her in confidence. Commentators called it a message of continuity. Inside the palace, Anne called it what it was, a declaration of loyalty between women who refused to be erased. As for William, he began moving quietly to isolate Camilla's influence. Advisors loyal to her were reassigned. Financial authorizations were suspended. Buckingham's corridors grew colder, conversations shorter. Even Camilla's closest allies sensed the shift. But Andrew was not done. With his media contacts tightening the circle, he prepared one final leak, one that could fracture the royal family beyond repair. A story suggesting that the monarchy itself was considering modernizing succession laws to accommodate new branches of heritage. Anne intercepted it just in time. The document, marked confidential, proposed expanding royal eligibility through recognized lines of affinity. To most, it was bureaucratic nonsense. To Anne, it was treason in ink. It meant replacing birthright with affiliation, a legal door through which Camilla's children could step straight into history. She confronted Andrew privately at a diplomatic reception. He smiled thinly, holding his glass of champagne. You can't stop the tide, Anne. Bloodlines evolve. Her reply was icy. Not when that blood is bought. By the time the guests left, The wind outside had risen into a howl. The monarchy stood on the edge of revelation and retribution. The next day, Anne delivered her findings to the king and William together. The evidence was conclusive. The plot to erode the heir's legitimacy was not merely rumor, it was an engineered coup within the crown itself. As the sun set over Buckingham's golden gates, Charles finally whispered the words no one expected to hear so soon. Summon the council. The transition begins now. The stage was set for the reckoning. The night Charles summoned the council, Buckingham Palace felt as though it were holding its breath. Behind every gilded door, whispers carried like wind through silk rumors that the king, frail yet resolute, had reached the end of his patience. For decades, Camilla had been a fixture of his heart and home, but now her name was spoken in hushed tones, always followed by one word: betrayal. Inside the stateroom, the air was thick with tension. Senior advisors gathered around the long mahogany table as Charles entered slowly, supported by a cane. William and Princess Anne flanked him, one the future, the other the spine of the monarchy. At the far end sat Camilla, expressionless, her gloved hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Let us begin," Charles said, his voice faint but unwavering. "We have lived through scandals before, but never have I seen such deceit from within." Anne's report was read aloud, the documents tracing media leaks to Andrew Parker Bowles, the recordings of private conversations where Camilla's allies discussed realigning the royal narrative, and the proposals to expand recognized bloodlines. Every revelation deepened the silence in the room. Camilla sat motionless, but her eyes blazed with a mixture of defiance and disbelief. When the accusations turned to her directly, she finally spoke. "You think I would harm this family?" she said, her tone sharp. "I have protected it. I carried Charles through years of hatred and mockery. I made this palace livable again. And for what? To be cast aside now that the perfect couple has arrived?" Charles looked at her long and hard. "You protected nothing," he said quietly. "You rebuilt the palace around yourself." Camilla's mask cracked. "And what of him?" she snapped, pointing toward William. "Your golden boy, so righteous, so untouchable. You all forget how easy it is to build an idol, but idols always crumble. Ask Diana." The words hung in the air like smoke. Even the courtiers froze. Anne's eyes narrowed, her jaw tightening. "You dare invoke her name," she said icily. "After destroying her peace and life and now trying to destroy her son in death?" For the first time, Camilla faltered. The silence was suffocating. From his seat, William spoke calmly, but with steel in his voice. "Rose is my past," he said. "Catherine is my life. And your schemes, yours and Andrew's, are the final proof that you never served the crown. You only served yourself." The council exchanged grave looks. The evidence was overwhelming, but it was Charles's expression, grief blended with finality, that told the room what would come next. He turned to the Lord Chamberlain. "Prepare the decree. Queen Camilla is to be suspended from all public and private duties until further review." Gasps filled the room. Camilla's face turned pale, her voice trembling, now not with rage, but disbelief. "You can't! Charles, after everything—" He interrupted softly, yet with the authority of a king. "After everything, Camilla, I cannot allow your legacy to destroy our future." Anne escorted her from the chamber. As they passed through the corridor lined with portraits of queens long gone, Camilla muttered bitterly, "They hated me too. Every one of them. History only loves ghosts." Anne stopped, turning to face her. "Then perhaps you should stop creating them." Outside, the press caught wind of an emergency royal session. Speculation erupted, a crisis of succession, a scandal, perhaps even abdication. By midnight, headlines blared across Britain. "Tension at Buckingham, Royal Council, summoned in secrecy." But the most damning detail, Camilla's loss of royal authority, was still under wraps. For now. Meanwhile, Andrew Parker Bowles was seen leaving his townhouse under cover of night, his car trailing discreetly behind a fleet of press vans. When questioned, he offered only a smirk and said, "History is full of women who couldn't tell loyalty from ambition. Camilla just chose the wrong king." Back in Buckingham, William and Charles sat alone. The king's eyes glistened, not from anger but sorrow. "I wanted peace, Will. I wanted to leave you a united crown." William's voice softened. "You still can. We'll protect the legacy not just of the crown, but of the truth." But Charles shook his head slowly. "The truth always comes at a cost, and this one may claim more than my throne." Beyond the palace gates, thunder rolled through London. Inside, the monarchy stood at its most fragile point in decades. The transition, once meant to symbolize renewal, had become a reckoning, not of politics, but of conscience. Anne, watching from her private balcony, whispered to herself, "The storm isn't over, it's only begun." Oh. And somewhere in the West Wing, Camilla stared out of her window, her reflection fractured in the rain-streaked glass. She had lost the room, lost the king, but not yet her will. Her last words to her maid before the door closed were chillingly calm. "They think they've won, but every king and every son has a secret. All I need is the right one." The shadow war for the crown was far from finished. The morning after the royal council's decree, the first rays of light fell over Buckingham's stone facade like a silent verdict. The palace gates remained closed, but the world outside was already ablaze with speculation. The press knew something monumental had happened, though none yet understood the full scale of Camilla's downfall. Inside, the corridors of power were stripped of their usual rhythm. Camilla's private suite had been vacated overnight, her personal staff reassigned, her crest discreetly removed from official documents. Where her laughter and perfume once lingered, there was now only the sterile scent of polished marble and silence. Charles did not attend breakfast. His health had faltered sharply after the council meeting, and the physicians urged rest. But those close to him knew the truth. It was not the illness that weakened him, it was heartbreak. For all her transgressions, Camilla had been the love of his life. Yet now, she had become the embodiment of his greatest shame. William and Catherine took over morning briefings with Anne and the Lord Chamberlain. "No statements," Anne ordered. "Let the silence speak for us." It was a tactic inherited from the late Queen Elizabeth measured restraint in the face of chaos. But this time, the silence was more than strategy. It was grief. By mid-morning, the first leaks began. Anonymous sources hinted that the Queen Consort had been temporarily relieved of duties, citing matters of internal concern. The tabloids filled in the blanks with predictable cruelty. "Queen stripped of power amid infidelity war," screamed one headline. Another read, "Camilla's revenge turns inward." Camilla, now sequestered at Clarence House, refused to disappear quietly. Her closest aide, a woman named Fiona Lang, recorded her tearful monologues, leaking fragments to sympathetic columnists. "They've made me a monster," Camilla sobbed in one recording. "But they forget without me, there would be no Charles the King." The narrative twisted again. Some commentators pitied her. Others accused her of emotional manipulation. Public opinion split sharply between those who saw her as a tragic relic of royal scandal and those who demanded her permanent removal. Meanwhile, Andrew Parker Bowles watched from the sidelines, quietly amused. His plan had not gone perfectly, but chaos suited him just fine. The exposure of the plot had damaged him politically, yet the very scandal that ruined Camilla kept his name in every newspaper. For a man obsessed with legacy, visibility was its own form of victory. In the palace, William faced a different battle. The institution demanded calm leadership, yet the people demanded answers. Every public appearance became a referendum on his worthiness. During a charity visit to Manchester, a journalist shouted across the crowd, "Your Highness, did you betray the princess?" William paused, looked directly into the cameras, and replied evenly, "My only loyalty is to my wife and to my country." The crowd erupted in applause. That clip, 20 seconds of composure, spread across the world within hours. "William the Steadfast," one headline read. But for all his restraint, the damage to the family's inner circle was deep. Trust had evaporated. Longtime courtiers whispered of the end of the blended monarchy experiment, the fragile illusion that Charles, Camilla, William, and Catherine could coexist under one public image. Anne, ever pragmatic, began consolidating the transition. She oversaw the quiet transfer of duties from Charles's office to William's. Ceremonial briefings, diplomatic correspondence, and state paperwork were rerouted to Kensington. "The monarchy must not bleed twice," she said sharply when questioned by an aide. Charles, bedridden yet lucid, received the updates in silence. In the privacy of his chamber, he penned a short note, his handwriting shaky but resolute. "The future belongs to my son. Let him rule with integrity, where I ruled with compromise." Hell, that letter would later be found sealed with the royal crest, delivered to William the following morning. Across the city, Camilla's isolation deepened. The guards outside her residence were doubled, not for protection but containment. Royal protocol dictated discretion. She was not under arrest, but neither was she free. To the world, she was on retreat. To those inside, she was exiled within her own crown. She spent her nights pacing, writing letters to Charles that would never be sent. Sometimes she wept, other times she raged. "They will thank me one day," she whispered into the mirror, "when the perfect ones crumble." But fate, as ever, had other plans. For in the very moment she sought sympathy, a cache of files was discovered in her personal study notes, correspondence, and a private ledger showing payments to media intermediaries. Among them, coded initials, dates, and references to staged encounters designed to implicate William. The discovery was the final nail in her gilded coffin. The evidence was presented to the royal council under seal. This time, there would be no defense, no tears, only the quiet acceptance of a truth that could no longer be spun. Anne summarized it best. She didn't fall from grace, she dug through it. End of. That evening, as the sun set over London, Buckingham Palace issued a brief but historic statement. In light of recent events, Her Majesty the Queen Consort will withdraw indefinitely from public life. The King, with the support of the Prince and Princess of Wales, will continue his duties as head of state. It was diplomatic language for a private catastrophe. Inside Clarence House, Camilla watched the announcement on television, her reflection fractured in the screen's glow. A single tear rolled down her cheek as she whispered, almost to herself, "Every king has his Camilla, but only one survives the story." For the first time in decades, the monarchy stood without its most controversial figure. But as the city slept under calm skies, a new question began to rise, whispered in corridors, written in headlines, murmured across the nation. Had the storm truly passed? Or had it only changed its crown? The following morning, the bells of Westminster tolled under a cloudless sky. For the first time in months, London felt still, neither mourning nor celebrating, but exhaling. The storm that had consumed the monarchy was finally quiet. King Charles appeared briefly at the palace balcony, his frame thinner, but his gaze firm. At his side stood William and Catherine, radiant yet solemn. The trio waved to the crowd below. Thousands gathered, not for ceremony, but for reassurance. What they saw was not scandal, but survival. That afternoon, Charles signed the long-awaited proclamation of abdication. The document, heavy with wax and history, declared the transfer of royal duties to his eldest son. It was both an end and a beginning. As the ink dried, Charles whispered to William, "I leave you not a crown of gold, but one of truth. Guard it better than I did." The transition unfolded with grace. Catherine, now the princess consort in waiting, became the new face of stability. Her quiet strength during the chaos had earned her the people's devotion. Polls showed near universal support. For many Britons, she was the embodiment of what the monarchy should be: steadfast, compassionate, and untouchable by scandal. Camilla, meanwhile, faded from public sight. Confined to a private estate in Wiltshire, she lived in what the press called voluntary seclusion. Andrew Parker Bowles left the country soon after, his reputation irreparably damaged. The files recovered from his network were sealed in the royal archives, marked under the label Matter of Integrity. Princess Anne became the silent architect of restoration. She restructured the household, tightened security around communications, and rebuilt public trust with quiet precision. When reporters asked about the turmoil, she simply said, "The crown endures. That's all that matters." And it did. Weeks later, a photograph captured the world's attention. William, Catherine, and their 3 children walking through the gardens of Windsor. Sunlight catching the gold threads of the future king's uniform. No titles, no speeches, just a family, united. The tabloids that once feasted on scandal now spoke of renewal. "The monarchy reborn," declared one. Another headline read, "From crisis to crown, William leads a new era." Yet inside the palace, Charles's portrait of Diana still hung in the West Corridor, untouched, unframed by irony. Visitors often noticed a small bouquet of white roses placed beneath it, fresh every week. No one knew who left them, though some suspected Catherine. Others whispered it was Charles himself. As spring settled over England, Buckingham Palace stood not as a fortress of secrets, but as a house rebuilt by consequence. Every betrayal, every revelation, had forged a harder truth. That power survives only when tempered by grace. On the eve of his first official address as king, William looked out over the gardens where his mother once walked and said softly to Catherine, "We've seen what ambition does to love. Let's lead with the opposite." Catherine smiled, her hand finding his. "Then let that be our legacy." And in that quiet exchange, the monarchy's new story began, not with scandal, but with resolve. A dynasty reborn not from bloodline alone, but from endurance, from truth, from love.